Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. A man dressed in medieval fashion is seen running from a medieval warrior armed with a sword in a forest when suddenly he appears in the desert in front of a modern car. The car almost hits him, but it stops, and the driver rushes to help the man who utters the words Castleguard. In the next shot, he is seen with slash wounds on his body, being revived in an emergency room. Unfortunately, the doctors fail to save him, and it is later revealed that the slash wounds were the least of his problems, with doctors finding some inexplicable changes inside his body. Just as the doctor explains to the sheriff that they can't identify the man, who had only a medallion around his neck, John, from ITC, enters the hospital to retrieve his body. His boss, an eccentric billionaire named Doniger, tells him to collect all the data the doctors have on the man as well and asks John if he returned alone. Doniger and his chief scientist, Kramer, have no idea how the man ended up in the desert. Meanwhile, the lead archaeologist, Professor Johnston, explains the history of the Castleguard excavation to the new members of his team. They are on site in France overseeing the archaeological investigation of the 14th century remains of Castleguard in La Roque, where French and English armies were positioned at one point during the 100 Years' War. The battle that took place on April 4, 1357, saw the English at La Roque defeated by the French when Lord Oliver decided to hang one of the French nobles, Lady Claire, from the walls for all to see. As Merrick explains, this action by the English drove Claire's brother, who led the French and their forces, mad enough to take the La Roque stronghold and win the battle. That night, as Johnston prepares for his meeting with Doniger, who funds the excavation, his son Chris comes to help and say goodbye. Johnston expresses his suspicions about the billionaire to Chris, unsure why he's funding them and how he gets all the information about the archaeological site that he's been passing to the professor. The next day, Chris talks to Merrick, who tells him about a sarcophagus they found at the site of a buried couple. He sees it as very romantic, showing him that the couple is sculpted holding hands. Merrick also mentions that the man was sculpted on the sarcophagus without an ear. His passion for the stories of the people involved in the Battle of Castleguard helps Chris understand what's so fascinating about history and archaeology as well. Suddenly, there is a collapse at the monastery on site, and all the archaeologists rush to investigate what has been unearthed. Since Kate is the one who worked at the site, she and Merrick go down the hole. Inside, they find some untouched documents wrapped in animal skin and a deliberately damaged stone sculpture. Before leaving the monastery, Merrick also finds a modern bifocal lens. In the next sequence, Stern tells them that they weren't invented until the 17th century and have no reason to be at a site that has never been excavated before. To make things even stranger, he also shows Kate and Merrick the documents they found with Professor Johnston's signature on them, along with the words "Help Me" written on them. The mystery is that the ink dating puts it at 600 years. Chris thinks his father is just playing a trick on them, but when Francis returns, they match the lens from the monastery with his glasses and are shocked. Chris calls Doniger to find out where his father is, and the billionaire tells him he will send a plane for him and his father's team. In the next scene, John and Kramer welcome them to the ITC Research Center or International Technological Society in New Mexico. Kramer explains that the center is working on a way to send 3D objects from one place to another using a special machine. He tells them that they made the machine work, but they didn't get the result they expected. When they tried to send something from their lab to a twin machine elsewhere, the object disappeared and then reappeared in their lab. That's when they discovered that the objects they were sending were actually sent back in time to 14th century Castleguard in France. The ITC accidentally discovered a wormhole that connects their machine to this place, an exact moment in history. When Doniger arrives, he explains to Chris that they didn't send his father's glasses and documents to the 14th century, but rather his father. He needs the team's help to bring him back because they need people who are familiar with that historical period. Merrick realizes that Doniger has been funding their excavation to understand why the wormhole is stuck at that specific place in time. Doniger is not very willing to answer all the questions about the machine, and out of sheer urgency, he makes the team agree to go back in time to Castleguard to find the professor. John steps in to prepare them, and in no time, the team is already dressed in medieval clothing and entering the machine with John and two of his men. Stern will stay behind and monitor them from the present. Before they enter, Kramer gives them special markers that will be their way back home. However, he and Doniger don't provide all the information about the dangers of the journey. The time travelers enter the machine, and in moments of excruciating pain, they find themselves in the wild French nature of the 14th century. John tells the team how to use the markers to see the remaining time and informs that the only way to use them to return home is to find a clearing. Immediately, they get into trouble with the English forces when a French person runs up to them telling them to hide. One of John's men is instantly killed, and when the other is surrounded, he activates a grenade and presses his marker. He returns to the present, and the grenade is activated, destroying the machine. Doniger and his team have no idea what happened to the rest of them or how they will bring them back to the present. Back in the 14th century, the team splits up, with a part staying behind while Merrick flees from the soldiers. He ends up hiding in the same spot where the woman they saw earlier in the forest was. The English knights find the spot but are attacked by the French in time to not discover them hiding. Merrick and the French woman escape, reuniting with the rest of the team once they reach the small village of Castleguard. Suddenly, the archaeologists realize that the date they were brought back to was the day when the French attack La Roque, and the entire place will be burned to the ground by nightfall. John says this just means they need to find the professor faster. In the future, Stern consults Kramer about the possibility of fixing the machine and bringing their team back. Kramer doesn't have a particularly optimistic view of the situation, but they will keep trying until the markers that keep the wormhole open are still active. In the 14th century, the team is amazed when they see the actual building they were working on as it was in reality. Suddenly, an English troop finds them and captures them, taking them to Lord Oliver. There's a great uproar when he hears their accents, so Merrick tells him they are Scots, whom the English are also at war with. The main problem arises when he hears Francis speak with a French accent and orders one of his men to kill him. The rest of them are taken as prisoners and placed in the same location as Professor Johnston. He naturally is happy to see them and explains that the English found him in the monastery, but he convinced Oliver that he was a capable master to provide him with a new type of weapon. The weapon is Greek fire, which creates such intense liquid fire that not even water can extinguish it. Merrick and Kate are worried because such a powerful weapon could give the English an advantage in the battle and even provide the means to alter the future. They suddenly realize that if they are taken to La Roque, they will be as good as dead as soon as the place is sealed for battle, so they need to escape fast. John tells them they need to get to a clearing near the village so they can use the markers, which Kate says show they only have 4 more hours. Kate devises a plan to climb out of the room through the roof and open the outside doors, and Merrick sees that the Frenchwoman who helped them twice has been captured by the English. Being a very good climber, Kate manages to reach the other side of the building via the roof and then enters through the window. To get to the door, she is forced to kill one of the guards and then frees the rest of the team. Merrick decides to help the Frenchwoman, and they split up. He kills her guard, but before he can free her, Merrick is attacked by Robert, one of Oliver's closest men. Merrick escapes him and enters the Frenchwoman's room, where she asks for help to get out through the wall. While making a hole, Robert breaks through the door. They escape at the last moment. The rest of the team follows John, uncertain of their future, unaware of the state of the machine. Kramer and the others are relieved to know that at least their people are still alive. In the past, Chris argues with John, thinking he's trying to go back and leave them behind. John finds out his marker isn't working, so he tells Kate to press hers. Unfortunately, hers doesn't work either. They move away from the clearing to hide because the English are after them. Meanwhile, Merrick and the woman escape from Castleguard by the river and have a conversation. Merrick discovers that the woman is Lady Claire, and he's surprised by this. Suddenly, a small troop of Frenchmen finds them and rescues Lady Claire. Before they leave, they're attacked by Robert and his men, but they manage to escape. Meanwhile, the rest of the team hides in the village, where they're quickly found by the English. Kate and Chris escape from the village, but the professor and John are captured by the troops. Claire and Merrick are taken back to the hiding place of the French forces, where her brother, Lord Arnott, is waiting for her. When he learns that Merrick saved the life of one of his men, Arnott spares his life, even though he's Scottish. Merrick thinks he can save Claire's life too if he asks her brother to keep her safe and protected from the English. He asks Arnott for a horse and a weapon to return to the rest of his team, ignoring Claire's warning about the dangers of doing so. Arnott goes to get what he asked for, while Claire says goodbye by giving him a kiss. Merrick rides off on a horse and leaves without knowing that the English have found the camp and are sending an assassin to kill Arnott. Meanwhile, Kate and Chris hide in the forest, thinking of a way to save his father. Kate remembers the tunnels in the monastery that lead to La Roque and convinces Chris that they should try to reach the fortress there. Simultaneously, John and the professor are being taken tied up in the cart to La Roque through the forest, while the city is being burned. Merrick approaches the city to find his friends, however, he doesn't know that he's being followed by the English. The other English troop arrives at the French camp and attacks them. Arnott manages to drive them away, but Claire escapes again. At the same time, Robert captures Merrick and takes his marker. Robert takes Merrick to the English siege heading for La Roque and throws him into the cart pulling the professor and John. Suddenly, Robert reveals that he is actually Decker, one of John's men who didn't return to the future during their last trip. He has built a life for himself in the past and is unwilling to go back to the future. Furious with John for leaving him behind, Robert kills him and leaves his body to be trampled in the middle of the road, to the surprise of Merrick and the professor. They realize that without John, Chris, and Kate, they've lost all the markers to go back home. Robert tells them about the cost the wormhole journey has on their bodies, aware that he can't make any more trips, otherwise, he'll end up like the man at the beginning of the movie. In that sense, he says that if they work with him, everyone can rise in Oliver's esteem and have a good life in the past. Kate and Chris arrive at the monastery at the foot of La Roque Fortress and convince the monks to let them in because they're friends of the professor. Simultaneously, the English arrive at the fortress, and Robert makes the prisoners work on the Greek fire immediately, saying that Oliver wants a demonstration of the weapon before nightfall. The professor and Merrick see that they've been provided with all the materials needed for the weapon when Johnston has a crisis of conscience, realizing that this could influence the course of history. Merrick tells him that by saving Claire, he may have done that, so they start working to at least save themselves. Meanwhile, Kate and Chris find the chamber where she was working when one of the monks tells them that Arnaud is preparing to attack the fortress. This makes them hurry to find the tunnels, so they go under the monastery. Down there, Kate easily finds the way to the box where the leather parchment with the documents was found. They see the doctor's glasses in the box too, but they put them back so they can find them again in the future. Suddenly, Kate discovers where the tunnel is hidden when she sees the stone sculpture that was damaged when she found it in the future. She grabs a tool and starts breaking it, while Chris holds the monks. He helps her to break through the stone at the end, and they find the tunnel. Before they enter, she tells one of the monks to find Arnott and inform him about what they found. She and Chris enter to find the opening on the other side, while the professor and Merrick prepare for their demonstration. While the French are still firing in La Roque, Merrick ignites the Greek fire and hits one of the French catapults. At first, it seems like the weapon did little damage, leaving Oliver irritated because he thinks it doesn't work. As the French try to extinguish the fire with water, it only worsens, spreading everywhere. The more water, the more fire. Oliver realizes how the weapon truly works, then orders all the cannons to be loaded with Greek fire. Robert takes the professor and Merrick back to work on more of the liquid, allowing them 20 assistants from Oliver's ranks. Simultaneously, Arnott gathers his troops for battle, preparing to attack the fortress, while Oliver puts his archers on standby. In the future, Doniger argues with Kramer that they haven't been able to make the machine work efficiently enough. Stern and Kramer think it's enough to try to bring the team back, but Doniger doesn't want to risk it. Kramer confronts him about it privately, but as they argue, Doniger shoves him, injuring him severely. The battle in the past continues with archers firing from each side of the line, with both sides suffering significant damage. Oliver fires night arrows at the French, decimating Arnott's forces before they can fire again. Arnott calls his troops to retreat when he's informed about the tunnels beneath the monastery to reach La Roque. He leaves instructions for his troops and rides to the monastery, arriving just as Kate and Chris find a dead end in the tunnel. La Roque continues to be hit by French attacks, so Oliver orders his special surprise to be brought out. Merrick sees they've recaptured Claire and are preparing to hang her in the battlements for all to see if Arnott doesn't stop the siege. The professor tells Merrick that history can't be changed, but Merrick feels differently. He steps out and threatens Oliver that he'll blow up the entire Greek fire arsenal if they don't release Claire. However, Robert sees through his bluff, knowing that if he ignites the fire, Merrick will kill everyone, including Claire, so he suspects he won't actually do it. Merrick, however, doesn't back down. At the same time, Arnott reaches the dead end of the tunnel, and when he hears Kate and Chris speaking English, he thinks it's a trap and prepares to kill them. Back in La Roque, Merrick ignites the arsenal and flees from the explosion, which shatters the fortress to the joy of the French, who prepare to attack. It also creates an opening in the tunnels, convincing Arnott that Kate and Chris are really on his side. He and his men enter La Roque, while his forces attack it from the outside. Oliver still doesn't give up, and when he sees Arnott inside the fortress, he orders his men to kill Claire. A battle ensues where Arnott's archers manage to save Claire. Kate and Chris find the professor. La Roque soon descends into chaos as the team tries to find Merrick so they can escape. Oliver and Arnott finally begin to fight, nearly equal in strength, while Merrick finds Claire. Robert seems ready to kill them, but Merrick pushes him downstairs, falling with him. Meanwhile, Chris knocks Oliver down to save Arnott from death. While Oliver and Chris fight, Arnott approaches from behind the Lord and kills him with a knife to the chest. The French breach the fortress gates, giving the team a clear way out. Merrick and Robert fight when Robert cuts off Marek's ear, making Merrick realize that he was the knight buried in the sarcophagus with a noblewoman that he unearthed in the future. He stands up and manages to kill his enemy. As Chris approaches to call him, Merrick tells him that he will stay in the past, then takes the marker from Robert and hands it to Chris, saying that he'll stay, as he's decided to live with Claire. In the future, Stern locks himself in the main operating room of the machine, preparing it for the last remaining minute in which the team can return. Chris reunites with his father and Kate in a clearing with some Englishmen on their trail when Doniger enters the machine room to deactivate it. Chris and the others activate the last remaining marker before they're caught. Simultaneously, Doniger enters the machine as it's activated to bring the team back and gets locked inside. As the group is brought back to the future, Doniger is sent back to the past without a marker. He's immediately killed by the men chasing Chris. Sometime later, the professor continues working on the excavation of Castleguard when they come across the sarcophagus again. In the movie's final moments, the professor's team realizes that Merrick had a happy life with Lady Claire in the past, and he left a message for his friends in the future.